The crystalline spires of Zarthan Prime pierced through the purple haze of the planet's twin suns, casting geometric shadows across the Grand Assembly Hall. Daniel Chen stood at the entrance, his standard-issue diplomatic uniform feeling suddenly inadequate against the backdrop of alien magnificence. He had been humanity's representative for 3 years now, yet the weight of his position never fully settled. "Ambassador Chen," the protocol droid chirped, its synthetic voice cutting through his thoughts. "The coronation ceremony will commence in 7 minutes. Please proceed to your designated position." Daniel nodded, straightening his collar. This was supposed to be routine, another alien ceremony, another display of interstellar diplomacy. The Zarthan civilization was one of the oldest in the known galaxy, their empire spanning 400 systems. Their royalty was more symbolic than practical, a living connection to traditions that predated humanity's discovery of fire. The hall filled rapidly with dignitaries from across the galaxy. Methane-breathing krill floated in their containment spheres, while the insectoid vector representatives clicked their mandibles in what Daniel had learned was polite conversation. He took his place among the human delegation, nodding the careful distance other species maintained. Humanity was still the newcomer here, barely 2 centuries into interstellar politics. The ceremonial gongs resonated through the hall, their frequency designed to be perceivable across multiple sensory spectrums. The crowd fell silent. She entered from the eastern archway. Princess Melissa, or rather, Crown Princess Melissathara in the full Zarthan pronunciation, was tiny even by her species standards. The Zarthan averaged 4 feet in height, but Melissa barely reached 3.5. She wore the traditional coronation robes that seemed to swallow her small frame, layers of bioluminescent fabric that shifted colors with each step. Her large, almond-shaped eyes were characteristic of her species, adapted for the low light of their ancient underground cities. Daniel had read the briefing materials. At 23 standard years, Melissa was young for a crown princess, thrust into succession after a plague had decimated the royal family 5 years ago. She had spent those years in isolation, undergoing the traditional education and neural enhancement protocols required of Zarthan royalty. The ceremony proceeded according to ancient custom. The High Curator spoke in Old Zarthan, a language so archaic that even the translation matrices struggled with its nuances. Daniel's neural implant fed him approximations: duty, honor, the eternal cycle of leadership, the burden of history. Melissa ascended the dais with careful, measured steps. Despite her small stature, she carried herself with a dignity that commanded attention. The crown, a lattice of quantum-locked particles that hovered above the wearer's head, was brought forward by the keeper of traditions. As the crown descended, something unexpected happened. Melissa's eyes, which had been properly downcast in ceremonial deference, suddenly snapped upward. She was looking directly at Daniel. The quantum crown paused mid-descent. The entire assembly gasped, a sound that translated across species barriers as pure shock. In 3,000 years of Zarthan coronation history, a crown bearer had never stopped the ceremony. The quantum lattice itself responded to the royal bloodline's neural patterns. For it to halt meant Melissa herself had rejected it. But she wasn't rejecting the crown. She was staring at Daniel with an intensity that made his breath catch. "You," she whispered, and the hall's acoustic enhancement systems carried that single word to every corner. "You were there." Daniel's confusion must have been evident. He had never met Melissa before. The briefings confirmed she had been in isolation for 5 years, and he had only arrived at Zarthan Prime 2 days ago for the ceremony. Melissa stepped away from the crown, ignoring the scandalized chittering of the assembled dignitaries. She descended the dais with shocking speed for someone in ceremonial robes, moving directly toward the human delegation. Security drones activated, but the High Curator raised a hand, stopping them. Whatever was happening, it was unprecedented enough that even the most rigid protocols bent before it. You don't remember, Melissa said, now standing directly before Daniel. Up close, he could see the faint bioluminescent patterns beneath her skin, the mark of Zarthan nobility. But I do. I remember everything. Your Highness, Daniel began carefully, I think there's been some mistake. No mistake. Her voice was firm despite her small stature. 5 years ago, the plague ship, you were there. Daniel's mind raced. 5 years ago, he had been a junior medical officer on the UNSS Nightingale, a humanitarian vessel. They had responded to a distress call from. His blood ran cold. The refugee convoy, he whispered. The memory surfaced with sudden clarity. The Zarthan refugee ship, fleeing the plague that had devastated their core worlds. By the time the Nightingale arrived, most of the crew was already dead. Daniel and his team had gone in with hazmat suits, pulling survivors from the wreckage. He remembered the children especially, so many small, frightened children. There was a child, Daniel said slowly, caught in a collapsed section. The others wanted to leave her, said the structural integrity was failing. But you went back in. You carried me out. You stayed with me in the medical bay for 3 days while the fever broke. The hall was completely silent now. Even the translation matrices seemed to hold their breath. You told me stories, Melissa continued, her eyes glistening with what Daniel recognized as Zarthan tears, slightly luminescent like liquid starlight. Human stories, about a man named Odysseus who spent years trying to return home, about a girl named Alice who fell down a rabbit hole into wonder. You told me that smallness wasn't weakness, that the universe was vast but individuals still mattered. Daniel did remember now. The small child, barely conscious with fever, asking him over and over if she was going to die. He had stayed with her because no child should die alone, royal or not. He hadn't known she was royalty then. In the chaos of the plague ship, such distinctions had seemed irrelevant. I didn't know who you were, Daniel said softly. No one did. The royal family had hidden me among the refugees, thinking I might be safer away from the palace as the plague spread. They were wrong, it followed us. Everyone on that ship died except for 17 of us. You saved those 17. The High Curator stepped forward, his aged features unreadable. Is this truth, Crown Princess? Absolute truth, Melissa declared. This human gave me life when death was certain. Under the ancient laws, such a debt is sacred. A murmur ran through the assembly. Daniel's neural implant struggled to translate the nuances, but the general sentiment was clear. This changed everything. The first law, the High Curator said slowly, as if speaking words that hadn't been uttered in centuries. A life debt to one outside the bloodline. The law is clear. Such a one must be recognized. Wait, Daniel interjected. I don't understand. But Melissa smiled at him, and despite her alien features, he recognized the expression of the frightened child he had once comforted. By the first law of Zarthan, a life debt of this magnitude cannot go unpaid. You did not save me for reward, which makes the debt even greater. You are hereby recognized as a brother of blood to the royal house. The implications hit Daniel like a physical blow. Brother of blood. He knew enough Zarthan history to understand what that meant. It was a title that transcended species, politics, even time itself. It made him, effectively, part of the royal family. The quantum crown, which had been hovering patiently above the dais, suddenly shifted. It split, forming 2 interconnected lattices. Impossible, someone breathed. But it was happening. The crown had recognized the life debt, had acknowledged Daniel's new status. In all of Zarthan history, the crown had never divided for someone outside the bloodline. Melissa turned to address the assembly, her small voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. I accept the crown, but I do so acknowledging the debt that can never be fully repaid. This human, Daniel Chen, reminded me when I was dying that individuals matter. That smallness is not weakness. Today, I prove those words true. Today, History changes because one man chose compassion over convenience. She looked back at Daniel. Will you stand with me, not as a servant but as family? Daniel thought about his orders, about diplomatic protocols, about the countless regulations he was probably violating. Then he thought about a small, frightened child asking if she would die alone, and his answer came easily. Yes. The dual crown descended, one lattice settling above Melissa's head, the other above Daniel's. The quantum particles synchronized, binding them together in a way that transcended mere ceremony. History didn't just stop in that moment, it pivoted. The alliance between humanity and the Zarthan Empire would reshape galactic politics for centuries to come, but all of that would come later. In that moment, there was only a tiny alien princess and a human who had once shown her kindness, standing together as the twin suns of Zarthan Prime cast their light through the crystalline spires, illuminating a future neither of them could have imagined. And perhaps that was the point. The universe was vast, but individuals still mattered. Sometimes they mattered enough to stop history itself.